Hello, welcome to another internet programming class. Today we'll be talking about CSS. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. Now CSS is a language that all websites use to make the information in them visually appealing and interesting to look at. You will need the knowledge of CSS to also make your sites and pages interesting and beautiful to navigate. So let's go right into class as we look at the topic on CSS. Hello, we'll be looking at a brief overview of CSS. Now CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. So in this session, we'll be looking at the definition of CSS, what it means, and what CSS selectors are. After this, we'll look at how to add CSS to HTML documents. We'll also look at CSS comments and then some demonstrations. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. It's a language that helps us to build websites that are interesting and visually appealing. So CSS makes us to control many things on the web page, such as the styles, the fonts, the spacing of elements, or generally how things appear on web documents. So it's a simple mechanism for adding styles to web pages. Also, the CSS language can be used to control the visual appearances of web pages. So with CSS, you can control the color, the font, the size of text, the spacing, and how the elements are positioned and laid out on a page or on the screen. Whether it's going to be a phone or a tablet or a desktop or a laptop, CSS makes all this possible. Let's have a quick demo on how CSS behaves on a typical web page. So I'm going to go to this site. It's a W3 School site, and it helps us to see how a site appears when you apply several different CSS style sheets on them. Okay, so this is the page. It's a very simple page. It has some menus here, and then it also has a sidebar, and it has a footer. So the CSS applied on this page determines how it looks like. Remember, the contents are all the same. The content is as it is. But if I move to another style sheet, that means another page that I've added a different CSS from the one that we are seeing here, it looks like this. So you see the heading is the same heading, the same content, but a different style sheet is making it look absolutely different, as if it's something else. If I apply yet another different style sheet, it looks like this. Again, it's the same content, but the CSS working on this is also different. Then look at another one. Again, the same content, but different visual appearance based on the style sheet that was applied. And this is how that page looks like if there is no style sheet applied at all. It's just blank. So what made the difference in all what I've shown so far is the different style sheet that was applied for the different pages. So that's exactly what CSS does. It helps you to have different visual appearance based on how you set the color, the font style, the font weight, and several elements on that web page. Let's talk about CSS selector. Before now, we've been talking a lot about HTML, and we mentioned different HTML tags and elements. One of it, for instance, is the paragraph tag, which is called the P tag or the P element. So you can apply CSS to a paragraph to make it, for instance, have a color. Okay, so to do that in CSS, you say you use the paragraph selector or the element selector, for instance, P for paragraph, and then you specify what you want to do to the paragraph. In this case, the color of the paragraph should be red. So this is the syntax used in defining CSS. Color is a property, red is the property value, and then when you put them all together, it becomes the declaration. So this is the CSS declaration that makes you make a paragraph to have a red color. Okay, so Property is the CSS element you wish to manipulate, and value represents the value of the specified property. There are different CSS selectors. This selects the paragraph. There is also the class selector and the ID selector. So they also help you to select different aspects of your web page and apply styles to them. Now let's look at different ways you can get CSS into your web page. The first one is called inline CSS. So this first method uses the style attribute inside HTML element you want to work on. For instance, you have an H1 tag. You recall from previous lessons we mentioned H1 is heading 1, the first level heading. So you may decide to have your heading 1 to have a color blue. Okay, so you use the style element in your heading 1 tag to show that you want to make the color of the heading 1 blue. And this is the way it's written. Style is equals to, then you bring in your quotes, write your color with a column and blue, and then you close the quotes. So using inline CSS, you write the style within or inside the HTML tag that you want to use. So in this case, you are specifying the paragraph to be red. And as you can see from here, the output will be a blue heading for this one and a red paragraph for the second one. So this is called inline CSS. You are using the CSS inside the HTML tag. The next one is what is known as internal CSS. So this is used to define a style for a single HTML page. Remember, the first one, the inline CSS, you had to define styles for each tag that you are using. But this internal CSS, when you define your CSS, it applies to the whole document. So you can use it for a single document. And you place the style attribute on the head of your page. Remember, a simple web page has the HTML that starts it and ends it. Then you have the head tag. Okay, so the head, this is the opening head tag, and this is the closing head tag. Within the head tag, you now define your style. Okay, so the style you want to be applied on that web page. So this will apply to the whole of the document. In this case, you are telling the web page that you want the body to have a background color of powder blue, an H1 color of blue, and a paragraph of red. So this is a second method called internal CSS that you use to define the CSS element that you want applied in your web page. So this is defined in the head section of the HTML page within the style element. Now, the third way you can get CSS on your web page is by creating a separate file, which is a CSS file. So in this case, you see there's a file called styles.css, just a single separate file, and it's given the extension .css. There you can define all the CSS you want for the body, for the different attributes of the web page. Okay. The beauty of an external CSS is that you can use it for many HTML pages. Unlike the internal CSS that applies just to one page, if you define your CSS elements on a separate file, you can use that file and reference it in different HTML pages. So you don't have to repeat yourself several times. Okay? So you'll notice that the CSS file contains no HTML code. That's the one that is in a separate file. It's just on its own, no HTML code here. These are just CSS declarations. Okay, and the file is saved with a .css extension. So here are some examples of CSS declarations. For instance, you have a body and you're having the background for the body to be coral. You have an H1, which you are defining a border around the heading 1. You have a class called P1, and you are giving it a font family. That's the type of font that should display for that paragraph. And so you can define different tags and give them different behaviors or appearances based on the CSS you define. So it will be very interesting and very nice to look at the different CSS elements that you can apply to your web page to make them appear very nice. Now, I also mentioned about comments, CSS comments. So usually you write comments in your documents or CSS file so as to remind you of something you need to do, or even to guide you on why you are doing what you are doing at that point in time. The way you write a CSS comment is shown right here. Okay, so you have a slash and an asterisk, and then you put the comment there and end your single line comment, for instance here, with a star and an asterisk and a slash. So defining this is a comment, and when it's being run or the parser looks at it, it ignores everything that is in the comment. The comment is just for you. It doesn't show on the web page. So these are CSS elements. There are several of them, and it's worth looking into the course material and several documentation to understand the different CSS elements that we have. So let's quickly look at a demonstration of CSS as we go on. So let's quickly look at the demonstration of CSS on a typical web page. Here I am in my little code editor here. It's just a single page I'm working on called index.html. Right, so you can see the code here. I have the beginning HTML tag and the closing. So I'm going to use method 2, which is putting the CSS on the head of the document in this simple demonstration. Remember, you can also have your CSS inline, or you can create a CSS file and put all your code there, but I'm going to use my CSS on the head just to quickly show us. So this document is just a simple document about us, get to know more about us, and it has about 3 or 4 paragraphs, and then you have your closing tag and HTML all here. So this is how, when you save the file and you run it, this is how it looks like here. So you will notice that it has a name here, my uni. That is what was defined in the title tag at the head here. What do we want to do? We want to make this page look very interesting. We have our H1 tag. Supposing we would like to have our H1 header 1 to have the color gray, and to maybe have a font type that is different from what we have here, and also change the alignment. So we just come to the style element and specify which element we want to work on. So I want to work on H1, and I put my curly brackets, and already it gives me the opportunity to do that. I want the color, note the spelling of color. I want the color to be, say, gray. You see my text editor is already helping me to know what I want to do. So that's all it takes, and you close it there. And supposing I want the font family, if you have a very good editor, it gives you some ideas. So if I want a font family of Arial, Helvetica, Sans Serif, I will just type it or just choose it from here. And so I have it. Okay, and I can specify the alignment I want for this my H1 tag. Remember, H1 is all about, it's saying about us. So I want the alignment to be center and not to be where it is by the left hand side. So I use the word text align. Okay, so text align, I will prefer it to be center. Notice the spelling of center. So when it's done, I just save my code and I go to refresh my web page. And you can see my H1 about us, which is here, has gone to the center just as I want it. So that's the way you play about with CSS. Okay, now let's style our H2 element. That's the heading 2. Remember, we can have up to several heading 6 or so. So let's just move into heading 2 and style it. To do that, I have to come outside where I finished my heading 1 and just specify H2 and use my curly brackets just as I've done. Now I can specify a different font family. So I have a font family, so you can see the different things you can do here. So play around with it and see how it can go. Let me choose Georgia, Times New Romans, and all that. So I have that CSS declaration done now. I now move to the color. I can specify a color of, say, why not, let's use light pink, which is here, and I end with my semicolon. And then the text align. So this aligns my text as well, which I can make to be center. Okay. So after I've entered the CSS declaration, you save the file. Always remember to save. If you don't save, it won't show up on your web page. And you go to the web page index.html that you've defined, and just refresh. So you see it's already done the second bit. So I'm already styling this web page and I'm making it more attractive and visually appealing. Now I'd like you to take note of a selector that I put here. Remember I mentioned there are different selectors, the element selector, and you also have the class and ID selector. In this case, I've defined a class called contact message. So this is to enable me to just target this section, and any element that has an attribute of this class contact message will have a styling that I can specify for them. So to do that, I come over to the head place and use this syntax dot contact message. That is the way we refer to class selectors. Okay, so dot contact message, and I use my curly brackets, and within it I can put the code I want. So I can just, for instance, specify that this contact message should have a background of light gray. Just specify background color light gray. Okay, that's all. Save the file, Control S, and then refresh your web page to see how it looks like. So already you can see here the background color of just only this paragraph is light gray. So we have started working on CSS, and this is basically how CSS declarations are made on your web page. In this case, we have put it on the head of the web page, and it's applying to everything that we have on that page. Here's a small exercise for you to do. Create your own web page. So get your code on the code editor and try to change the color of all the paragraph elements to red. Okay, so you can use the element selector for that. Also change the color of the element with an ID parameter, that's ID para1, to red. Check up on the ID selector, it's a CSS selector type, and try to work on it. Then change the color of all the elements with the class color text to red. So create a class within your document and change all the elements to red. Lastly, change the background color of your web page to green. So try your hands in this exercise. Share with us in class what you have done.